clicker on? Great. And so we've been doing these Lenten dialogues. Hopefully this is a little bit of fun for you. I'm going to be talking with Pastor Ron about the recipe of faith. Also here with him tonight is his wife, Sue-Ann. She'll probably also be handing you a door prize on your way out. Stay tuned for that. Sue-Ann, I'm so glad you're here as well. Sue-Ann was a member of Deborah's Circle here at Bethany, as well as in the choir for many years. And Pastor Ron, what's your connection with this place?
I'm Sue-Ann's husband.
Excellent. This is Sue-Ann's husband, Pastor Ron Glusenkamp. There's a lot of people out here who probably don't know, some who are really excited to see you, some who maybe are less excited to see you, and some who have no idea who you are.
And I haven't even spoken yet. So, I served here as pastor with Pastor Ruth Ann Lockery for the better part of 2006 to 2014. And it's just a joy, a pleasure to be back here with you all again. So thank you for coming out.
Thank you for being here. It's a real treat. Why don't you start, though, as we think about this recipe of faith and your knowledge of bread baking, talk to us first, though, about that passage that we read from Galatians, and just start things off with some ideas about that for us.
Well, you can see that they're in Galatians, and, Luther just loved the book of Galatians, and it really is quite a wonderful exposition of law and gospel. But in the passages that precede our recipe of faith for tonight, in kind of 20 and 21 of chapter 5, it's about things that we should not do. It's about prohibitions. And then Paul kind of shifts then and says, but there is this, the fruits of the Spirit are these. And in the translation that we read, the word that I really want to focus in on is the word in the translation that we had is forbearance. In the New Revised Standard Version, that gets translated as patience. And the whole notion of patience, the Greek word that's used there, is really countercultural. I mean, it has patience with it, but it also has against all odds, against all opposition, to really hang in there the best that you can do. And so one of the things we're going to talk about tonight is the whole notion of time and patience when we're baking, when we're letting it rise.
Absolutely. What I was thinking about that is that patience really seems to go hand in hand with bread making.
Yeah.
I think that's pretty fair to say. But then I'm also thinking about the ways that bread and patience, you're already kind of making the connection, but why don't you keep going on this? How else do you see it, just off the cuff, and starting off, connecting with our life of faith?
Well, we're very busy, right?
Yeah.
And I always used to say that Lent is spring training for Christians. It's time to get your muscles stretched and get ready, for the main events and everything. So we take 6 weeks out of our year to focus on the way of Jesus, on his journey to the cross. And then we spend 7 weeks celebrating the resurrection. So we know what the emphasis is about the resurrection. But I do think it is very important to think about taking time out, or kind of freeze-framing time. And at the end of this verse, in verse 23 and 24, then it says, against such things there is no law. So these are exhortations. These are things that we get to do that flow out of our life in Jesus Christ. I'm delighted that Pastor Nate and Pastor Gary asked me to come tonight, because I just really, really believe that Jesus is the bread of life. Those 6 words are so simple, but they're so powerful. And so would you say those with me? Jesus is the bread of life. Now I would like to invite you to say them as if you actually mean them and believe them, okay? Jesus is the bread of life. And even let's say it a little bit louder so that our good friends, the Unitarians down the street, might hear us. Jesus is the bread of life. We're not confessing that Jesus was the bread of life, or that Jesus will be the bread of life, but Jesus is the bread of life. So once again, that whole notion of time, Pastor Nate, calls us in to the present, into the now, into being present right here.
Jesus is the bread of life today.
Yes.
And so time, I'm already hearing you say this, is one of the ingredients
Yeah,
for bread
right.
baking. What are the other ingredients? For those who don't know, it's really simple.
Great you ask, and I got a slide here for,
What are the
for
chances?
that, just in case. Forget. Flour, water, salt, and yeast. And these 4 ingredients all make appearances throughout the Holy Scriptures. But it's really pretty simple stuff. And every culture has some kind of tortilla, some kind of pancake, some kind of wrap, some kind of cracker, some kind of biscuit, right?
Yeah.
Left side, yes, that's
Yeah.
it, yes. Taxamicket. And, so it's really important that these 4 simple things, along then with time, you can create all sorts of things. So if you can...
What I love about that too is if we're saying Jesus is the bread of life and just the universality of what you're talking about as well, is that every culture has some form of flour, water, yeast.
And when we think, and one of the best organizations was founded by a Lutheran pastor, Pastor Art Simon, Bread for the World. Wasn't just bread for us.
Yeah.
Bread for the world.
But then I know, because we talked on the phone earlier this week, that there's another ingredient in addition to time, and that's like the conditions.
Yeah, and so you can adjust the conditions. So if you happen to have a leprechaun in your kitchen, like I did, and some green dye, you can twist and shout and make a shamrock. And also, kind of like the most beautiful granddaughter, Grace, in the world. So she and I love to bake together. And that's another thing, too, I would say, that in terms of our life of faith, our journey in faith, that this bread baking, this whole bread for the journey thing, is really intergenerational. I learned to bake from 2 very important women in my life who were the high priestesses of the inner sanctum in our kitchen, who were my grandmothers. And they could go in there with flour, water, salt, and leaven. And in that Holy of Holies, in that mystery, they could create fantastic things.
And I'm guessing many of the people out here have had experience baking or cooking with loved ones, and just the community forming, and the sacredness. That's what I hear in how you're talking about it. And bread baking too, though, seems to have, for me always, it used to be every Friday on my day off, I would make a loaf of bread. They're not nearly as good as yours, and that's why I stopped. But it was a spiritual practice for me.
Yeah, it is.
Because it was so embodied. And then I was telling you this when we were talking on the phone, and you mentioned something called breaditation, which is a really great word that I wish I came up with.
I wish I did too, because I would have copyrighted it, and I would, be on my yacht celebrating breaditation, with a. But Manuel Monade, who is a chef at Bread Ahead Bakery in the London Borough Market, and I've taken a bunch of classes with him online. He says that breaditation.
Do you want me to read it?
Would you read it? Yeah.
Breaditation is the act of gathering 4 simple ingredients: flour, water, yeast, and salt, and then combining them, kneading them into a dough, leaving the dough to proof, shaping it, baking it, and taking it out of the oven.
Yeah. So then when you do that, then you end up with something like this, And pretzels are so key during Lent. Some of you have heard this before, but there was, back in the day, a prayer posture, and would you do that, please? Put your hands, cross your hands in front of you, Nate, do you have your camera? Take a picture of all these people who look like pretzels while they're doing it.
Don't have my camera.
So it's really, so someone do it. Would you do that? Keep your hands up there. Someone would do that. And so this pose in Latin is bracelli, means folded little arms. And a German monk heard that word, bracelli. He might have been drinking liquid bread, I'm not sure. It wasn't Martin Luther either, but he heard brezel. And that's what the word is in German. And then the Germans brought the brezel to the United States, and it became the pretzel. But if you see, Jesus is the bread of life, and we have 3 segments here. So we have for Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. So every time you eat a pretzel or bake a pretzel, you're doing a very Trinitarian thing there.
I'm guessing that's not going to be the last time we see that pretzel.
Probably not,
Why
no.
don't you tell us about your other grandson, or your other grandchild, who I know you have a picture of here. Oh, go back one more.
Yeah, I was
There
just
you
going to say, if you need a living definition of what breaditation is, look at 4-year-old Theo. And he doesn't stop for anything. But here we are baking and talking about Jesus is the bread of life and doing all sorts of stuff. And we're measuring and we're doing fractions. Now, of course, I mean, genetically he's brilliant, and all that, type of stuff.
But what I hear, and you talked about the high priestesses of the kitchen, like there's a community aspect to baking.
Yeah.
And I'm sure our kitchen, how many kitchen crew do we have here? They're probably all doing the dishes right now. But they've been working on grilled cheese all night long. There's just this community, and we talk about breaking bread together.
Yeah.
Breaking bread together. And I think that's an important piece of this whole.
So when we do that together, and actually this was a kind of cross-stitch piece that was in the home. Some of you will remember this couple, John and Gail Mullen. And I don't know if Gail did this or not. I know that she lives now at Windcrest, and John now celebrates the feast that has no end. But we were sitting there, and I saw that up on the wall, and it sounded so familiar to me. And Pastor Nate, would you read that?
Yeah, a crust that's shared is finer food than banquet served in solitude.
So that's really a paraphrase of Proverbs 17, verse 1. And it means that maybe even if all we have is bread and water, that's more than enough, right? Because that's going to that's going to be the recipe of faith and bread for the journey.
Well, and so what I'm hearing in all of this as we kind of wrap up our conversation about the recipe of faith, the recipe for bread is, yes, yeast, water, salt, what did I forget? Flour. But then these elements of time, that's certainly a part of our faith. This aspect of community, that's certainly an aspect of our faith as well. And so seeing these sort of parallels between them and how they all kind of come together there.
Yeah. And as we often say in the liturgy, as it was in the beginning, we say glory to the Father, to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be. I mean, think of how majestic and mysterious that confession is, right?
Yeah.
As it was in the beginning, back there in Genesis, before there ever was, as it is now, and as it ever shall be. Wow.
Yeah.
It's amazing. And it's a lovely, I think, formula for us. And then, if you take a look at those two pretzels up there, they're actually the same pretzel, but one is the way that we normally look at it, like this. But, Jesus always turns the tables on us. The last shall be first, the first shall be the last, the greatest, least, all that. And so if you turn the pretzel upside down, you can see that Jesus, the bread of life, has his arms outstretched on the cross. So you are never, ever going to experience or eat a pretzel again the same way without thinking about that. And then, as you know, Father Dom is a very good friend of mine, and he wrote this book, Bake and Be Blessed, and he's a Benedictine monk over in Peru, Illinois, and he said these words, and this is where we're going to kind of close, and then we'll have a talk back after we have prayers and benediction, and students are going for mentoring, right? Is that
Correct.
what they're doing?
You got it.
Mentoring. So Father Dom says this, Jesus didn't come to take away suffering, but rather to give it meaning. By becoming a fully human person, he united his suffering to that of the entire human race, so that when we inevitably experience pain and betrayal, we are united to God even more closely. Thus, Christ's suffering was redemptive. In Jesus, suffering becomes inextricably linked to love. Love without sacrifice, Father Dom says, is merely affection. And Jesus chose for himself a greater destiny. When Jesus was lifted up on the cross, he gained a new perspective. And from that height, he could see every person in history. He looked upon that vast sea of faces, generation upon generation of sinful, suffering, and hopeful humanity. And he realized that he loved them enough to die for them. And one of the faces he saw was yours. And one of the faces he saw was yours. Well, that's the good news, my sisters and brothers. That's what lit up the Reformation 500 years ago. That's why you youngins have to go to confirmation class. Or you don't have to go to confirmation class, but you get to go to confirmation class. Because that message that Jesus died for you, that Jesus died for the entire world, is so important. And that's why we're here. So say it with me again, if you would. Jesus is the bread of life. Bon appetit.